Hi all, my name is Ryan and welcome to my channel What the Pop, where we discuss pop culture in general and Buffy a lot. If you like what I do, please like, subscribe and click the notification bell to be notified whenever I upload a new video. If you have friends that like Buffy, share it with them. It all helps the algorithm. And please consider supporting the channel through our Patreon. The usual spoiler alert. I may talk about things in these analyses that relate to future plot points. So if you haven't seen all of Buffy at least once, and you don't like spoilers, I suggest you like the channel and then come back once you've seen it all. Today we continue our look at Season 2 with Episode 3, School Hard. A plot summary. Buffy is in Snyder's office with fellow juvenile delinquent Sheila. They're now responsible for parent-teacher nights or else they face expulsion. Spike and Drusilla show up. Spike is handsome as hell, Drusilla is batshit crazy. Spike promises to kill Buffy for the Anointed One. Spike stalks Buffy, sets up another vampire to watch how she fights, promises to kill her on Saturday. Turns out Saturday is the night of St. Vigius, a night when vamps are supposedly at their peak. Sheila gets kidnapped by Spike and fed to Drusilla. Angel warns that Spike is bad news. Miss Edith is naughty and she's having no cakes today. The Scoobies prepare for the Feast of St. Vigius while Buffy prepares for parent-teacher night. She makes lemonade without any sugar. We learn that Spike was known as William the Bloody, has faced 2 slayers and killed them both. Bad news for Buffy. Joyce and Snyder have a chat. Buffy is going to be grounded forever. Spike and Co break into the school. Spike was bored, couldn't wait until Saturday. Buffy takes control, herds people away, gets her John McClane on and starts crawling through the ceiling. She takes out a vamp, runs into Sheila. Oh crap, she's a vampire! Fights Spike, Spike gets the upper hand, Joyce hits him with an axe. Buffy gets a reprieve. She's not going to be grounded forever. Snyder suggests PCP gang, can't tell the truth. Spike kills the annoying child, yay Spike. This episode sees the introduction of Spike and Drusilla, 2 fan favourite characters, so this episode is always looked upon fondly by the fandom. Apart from Darla and Angel, so far our vampires and some of our monsters have been rather bland stereotypes. Even the Master was a very traditional Nosferatu-style vampire, though his dialogue was often a lot of fun and he was portrayed well. Spike and Drusilla bring 2 different elements to their characters. Spike is a very Billy Idol-based, bleach blonde, punk-inspired vampire, and Drusilla leans heavily into the Anne Rice Gothic romance style, with a helping of the crazies thrown in. This departure from the traditional immediately makes them compelling, and their interactions together, particularly Spike's warmth and devotion to her, have us hooked. Their chemistry together is palpable. Given what we know of Spike's character and the arc he goes through in 6 seasons of Buffy and the final season of Angel, it almost seems impossible that none of this was envisioned earlier. But we have to remember that Spike was only ever supposed to appear in a few episodes and then die, paving the way for Angelus as big bad for the season. But James Masters was so good and his acting so on point that he immediately became a fan favourite, which saved him from being killed off. Now some of this was the character as written and some of it was just superb acting choices by James Masters. He said he tried to play off of Sarah Michelle Gellar as much as possible, and as such, their scenes together are dynamic. His chemistry with Juliet Landau was why he got the role in the first place. Juliet had already been cast and they just needed their Spike, and they found that chemistry with James. Now, one of my favourite things in this episode is the comic 3-beat with the lemonade. A 3-beat is basically where you have a recurring theme or line that comes back 3 times. A prior example was the I like your dress line in Prophecy Girl, where Willow said it, then the Master, then Angel, by which point Buffy was like, yeah, it's a big hit. Here the first beat is when Willow asks Buffy how much sugar she used, and Buffy says sugar, indicating that there's no sugar in the lemonade. And we see Willow sip it and immediately spit it back into the cup, then says, it's good, while almost choking to death on it. Shortly after, when Joyce arrives, Buffy offers her some lemonade and Willow shakes her head emphatically to say, don't drink that, it's awful. Later on, when Snyder catches up with Joyce, Cordelia is bitchy, and Willow says, Cordelia, have some lemonade. Our comedic payoff, and our third beat, because we know how bad the lemonade is. Another interesting thing in this episode is that we find out that Snyder and the authorities know about the supernatural in this scene at the end.
I need to say something to the media people.
So?
So? You want the usual story? Gang-related, PCP?
But you have in mind the truth?
Right. Gang-related, PCP.
It's a good scene that indicates that the authorities are at least aware of some of the goings on in Sunnydale, and they actively work to cover it up. They're not as clueless and stupid as we think. One of my favourite scenes in this episode is when Spike dusts the annoying child by stuffing him in a cage and hoisting him into the sunlight. It is a complete rejection of tradition, of the way things have always been done. If we look at the annoying one as a continuation of the Master's reign, we see why the traditional vampires fell. The Master had power simply because he was old. Vampires by their nature tend to become more powerful the older they become. Now, while the Master had some real power, for example, his ability to hypnotize and control Buffy at a distance when she goes into his lair, we see that the Anointed One does not. When we first see Drusilla meet the Annoying One, she says, "This one has power. I could feel it from the outside." The problem is we have never seen that power. One of the things they talk about in Storytelling 101 is show, don't tell. In other words, don't tell us the Anointed One has power, show us. Have him do something that demonstrates that power. And we never see it. At the end of this episode, Spike easily picks him up, stuffs him in a cage, and hoists him into the sunlight to kill him with very little effort. The power that the Anointed One had doesn't exist. It was never real. The only power he had derived from tradition. The Anointed One was representative of traditional establishments like religion or other often patriarchal systems that derived their power from legacy rather than any real worth. He had power over the others around him simply because none of them thought to question it and to test that power. The Master was a traditionalist. He read from sacred texts and believed in prophecies, and he instilled that into the vampires he ruled. So when the Master declared that a child was the Anointed One, they never questioned it. Now, tradition fails when people start to ignore it, when it starts to grate against changing norms, or simply stifles social change. It is the rejection of tradition that destroys tradition. Power derived from that tradition similarly fails. Further, social progress is made through the breaking of tradition, by rejecting it's traditional, or we've always done it that way, the mantra that often gets raised against change and progress. Now, we saw with Buffy herself a breaking of traditions. It was made quite clear through season 1 that Buffy wasn't like other Slayers, that she didn't conform to the traditional Slayer mold and didn't act how the Watchers, the traditional patriarchal aspect of the Slayer, expected her to. This becomes quite clear in subsequent seasons, so it should come as no surprise that Buffy, a non-traditionalist, would destroy their very traditional Master. What's more, it was her breaking of those Slayer traditions that enabled her to survive, to overcome the Slayer legacy of dying young, and Buffy's influence affects those around her. Giles becomes more involved. He is no longer there just to train her, but actively assists her. He is no longer just a Watcher, and their relationship ultimately reforms the Watchers' Council, breaking thousands of years of tradition in the process. Then Buffy, through Willow, breaks tradition even further, when she unleashes the Slayer power for all who could wield it, and activates all of the Slayers. Now, if Buffy was a sledgehammer to the traditions of the Master, the way she was to his bones in Season 2, Episode 1, then Spike is a wrecking ball to what remains of those traditions. His look is modelled on Billy Idol, a British punk rock musician, and his ideology is punk, a subculture rooted in non-conformity and anti-authoritarian ideals. Spike is to the vampires what Buffy was to the Slayer line, a non-conformist that does things their own way and ultimately changes how things are done. Notice the difference between when vampires failed with the Master in season 1 and when Spike fails the Anointed in this episode. With the Master, those that failed him were apologetic and deferential. They expected punishment, or in the case of the poorly written plot device of the three, gave their life for their failure. Spike starts similarly, apologising for being unable to kill Buffy, but then basically laughs, says screw this and kills the Anointed instead, usurping him as the leader in Sunnydale. The Anointed had no power over Spike because Spike didn't respect the traditions that gave the Anointed that power. He says as he kills the Anointed, from now on we're going to have a little less ritual and a little more fun around here. The comparison between Buffy and Spike as the non-conforming, non-traditional aspects within their hierarchies, and the notion that progress is made through the rejection of those traditions, is further highlighted by their successes. Buffy was able to bring down the Master because she had done things her own way. Similarly, Spike brags he bested 2 Slayers in his time, and the Watcher diaries corroborate this, a feat he is able to do because he's not a slave to tradition, and Slayers of the past generally were. The second Slayer he defeated, however, was also more like Buffy. She somewhat bucked tradition, she had relationships, she bore a son, and her lack of adherence to the strict tradition meant that she was more unpredictable and was the Slayer for 7 years before being killed by Spike. A long life for a Slayer. From a character development perspective, Spike and Drusilla's arrival and the death of the Anointed One was necessary. In the first season, Buffy embraces her role as the Chosen One, leaving behind her childhood and the possibility of innocence in a normal life. We saw in the last episode the importance of the couples theme that was being established in this season, with Angel and Buffy, and Giles and Jenny. And the development of Buffy's sexuality as her relationship with Angel intensifies is going to provide a major plot point for this season. In this episode, we get another couple, Spike and Drusilla, a couple who are deeply sensual and overtly sexual, the very opposite of the chaste awkwardness of Buffy and Angel. While the Master represented tradition, destiny, and patriarchal authority, themes of the first season, Spike and Drew represent romance, sexuality, lust, and importantly, passion, a word that excites and revolts all Buffy fans because of its role in this season. Our introduction to Spike shows he's an upstart. He's confident, brash, boastful, but most importantly, isn't just talk. But then the beautiful, delicate, and gothic-looking Drusilla walks in, and he turns towards the camera and loses his vamp face to reveal the gorgeous James Masters. This reveal, going from a bombastic vampire, then softening into the beautiful and loving Spike, who tends to Drusilla, is every bit the shock that the beautiful David Boreanaz's revealing vamp face in season 1 was. And their interaction here is both tender and sensual. In the scene where Spike stalks Buffy at the Bronze, he looks very much predatory with a sexual undertone. Even Spike's name is phallic. When they exchange banter before they fight at the school, that sexual undertone is now overt. The sexual connotations of what Spike says are obvious. One of those things is fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of a nice ripe girl. They make it pretty obvious in this episode that Buffy is on her period. When Xander ran to her bag for a steak, the second thing he pulls out is a tampon. Now I know girls often carry tampons anyway, but it's highlighted in this manner for 2 reasons. First, it shows that Buffy is reaching sexual maturation, that she is no longer a child, is progressing toward adulthood. And second, it reminds us what a tampon is for, to collect menses. When Spike says he smells a nice ripe, and he pauses, girl, he is smelling her menses and making an assessment of her maturation. He purposely doesn't call her a woman in that moment. What follows is a sexual performance, a mind game that he plays to intimidate the sexually immature Slayer, to put her off her game. It doesn't seem to work initially, but he bests Buffy, and she is only saved by her axe-wielding mother, a sexually mature woman wielding a tool designed to cut down tall, phallic trees. Now, the Anointed One was a hangover from season 1, tradition in its death knell. As I said earlier, Buffy shattered it and Spike took to it with a wrecking ball. But it was necessary for Spike to kill the Anointed, as the themes for this season revolve around sexual maturity, something the Anointed, an eternal child, will never achieve. It makes sense then that this eternal child, as a representation of Buffy's childhood that she left in season 1, has to make way for the chaotic lust and passion of Spike and Drew. You see, often in movies when girls or boys have lost their virginity, that they talk of no longer being a girl or a boy, but are now a woman or a man. And in order to progress from childhood to adulthood, there is no place for an eternal child. So it's fitting that Spike, a representation of lust and sexuality, is the one to kill him. There are a number of good quotes in this episode, from the craziness of Drusilla and from Cordy's unfiltered brain simply blurting out everything she thinks. But my favourite is this one, from Spike.
If every vampire who said he was at the crucifixion was actually there, it would have been like Woodstock.
I had to rip your throat out.
I was actually at Woodstock. That was a weird gig. I fed off a flower person, and I spent the next 6 hours watching my hand move.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this look into the Buffyverse, please like, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting through Patreon. If you've disagreed with anything I've said, or feel like I've missed anything out, please put it in the comments below, and I'll see you next video.